Welcome, everybody. We are now live on Invent FM, episode number 3, featuring.
I don't know.
What?
Or is it 6? That was a little ambiguous.
Oh, yeah, sorry. 3 could have been 6. Yeah, featuring my friend and coach, Anamaria Nino-Murcia. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a little tough to introduce you because we've known each other for quite a while, and we talk about lots of different aspects of life. But I will just say from the start that Anne-Marie has been a super pivotal player in my own journey as an entrepreneur, and I'm super excited to have her on the show. We're gonna start by having her tell some stories from her own experiences as an entrepreneur, and from basically a decade of coaching entrepreneurs, and then talk a little bit about her inventions, so to speak, in terms of her approach to coaching entrepreneurs, and particular for the show, kind of the deep tech entrepreneurs, inventors, and how to help them transition into being leaders. So Anamaria, thanks for coming on. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, Raymond. Thanks for having me. So I put together some slides, which I'll start sharing in a moment. Yeah, let me just go ahead and do that now. And lest the kind of presentation facade fool you, my thinking was just in the era of COVID, since Raymond and I can't actually get together and have me like spread out my papers and photos in front of him, I'm just putting together these slides, but hopefully this will have a very informal feel. And Raymond, feel free to chime in with, jokes or wisecracks or questions as we go. But yeah, so I was kind of thinking we'd do this maybe in 2 parts. One part would be sort of my story as a coach to inventors and innovators. And then maybe at a certain point, we can flip gears and talk a little bit about sort of the spirit of invention that I bring to my own coaching. So with that, Raymond posed this question to me as prep for this session, which was, the question was, what does invention mean to you? And that definitely sent me down a really interesting rabbit hole, because I thought to myself, gosh, what does invention mean to me? So I went to the dictionary, I went to Google, and kind of got conviction for what I think I already intuitively felt invention was. But so here's sort of how I think about it, and here's my framework. I like to reserve invention for the kind of more narrow definition. It's when like somebody creates a new product, or introduces a process or a product for the very first time, right? Like there's sort of a laying claim to that. That's why people can patent inventions, all of that. And that's related to, but it's different from innovation. And I see innovation as more when people are maybe taking an invention and then bringing it to scale, or adjusting it or improving it for deployment in a new market, or they're making a significant contribution. Some might even say reinventing something, but it's still like they weren't first to it. They were sort of the people that came afterwards. And all of that can be subsumed by inventiveness, which in my mind is sort of a set of qualities or mindsets that people use and tap into when they are inventing or when they are innovating. And the image I'm showing here, I found this cool story, and maybe you've shared about this already on Invent FM, Raymond, but the idea being that like the inventor is the person or the team that like throws the rock or throws the pebble in the water. And then the innovators are every kind of ripple that like emanates outward from that impact. And entrepreneurs sort of ride waves, and some of the waves get really big, and some of these technologies go really mainstream. But I like that sort of distinction, because it sort of shows that it's like a system that works together, but there are people who are playing different roles. So that's kind of how I think about it, and that's sort of how I've organized my thoughts for what I want to talk through. I guess I'm curious, Ray, any quick like reactions to this?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you while you're in the group, but I think it's a really beautiful analogy. And I guess the thing that makes me think of is almost am I the rock thrower? Am I the wave rider? Or like in what aspects of what, I guess I'm saying but how to have that discernment for anyone. And in this moment, I'm really throwing the rock, and that's my role. Or in this moment, I know I'm surfing someone else's wave, and then that'll let me throw a rock somewhere else later. Or I love that analogy.
Yeah, or like in your case, like, 5 years ago, I threw
Right.
that rock, and now today I'm trying to turn myself into an
Right.
innovator leader. So it's like almost within the same person, how do I evolve my role?
Yeah. I
Um,
threw the rock. Now I'm trying to surf the wave.
throw the rock, don't drown, and then, then surf outwards.
Yeah.
Anyways, cool. So that's kind of, I'll reference this idea and I'll try to distinguish between inventors and innovators as I go, especially because I feel like sometimes inventors don't get the respect that they deserve. Like I think if we throw around that term too loosely, we kind of forget to honor that there is something unique about doing something new or doing something first. It's not better than or worse than, but I like to kind of keep that term for where it is and then use innovation sort of more broadly.
Yeah, it's true. And it's something that I'm actually struggling with as I think about just even the name of the show. Is like, am I honoring the term, or am I diluting the meaning of invention by trying to I don't know, bring attention to it. But I like that, and I think everyone can kind of have their own sense of where's that line
Yeah.
between innovation or invention. Okay.
Cool. All right. So a little bit about me and where kind of my like it's going to feel like a lifelong passion around like helping inventors and helping innovators start. And I mean, to be honest, it really does start in like the most cliche Silicon Valley way. So this is a pool shed in Menlo Park, California. And this picture is probably like 2009, 2010. And this is a picture of me and Brian Pate, who is the co-founder and co-inventor of ElliptiGO, which was the first startup that I ever worked at. And Brian and his co-founder Brent truly did invent, like patents and everything, the world's first outdoor elliptical bicycle. So I'll show you some pictures and some video in a moment. But this is really where it started for me. Less sort of my own story because I didn't go on to become a founder and CEO in my own right, but because this is where I fell in love with helping founders and helping inventors, the rock throwers and the wave surfers, as it were. And I love this picture because this was like some little Menlo Park blog post was like covering kind of the new generation of startup upstarts, and they're like, can we come and take a picture of you? And we had this whole, like, we had the bike ready and everything, but they went with this picture where we're like, our backpacks are everywhere. I don't even know what Brian's doing, like scratching his ear, but to me this is what it looked like, like I'm working out and like I'm working in workout clothes. Like we literally worked in a shed, so this was sort of the early days.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so we called it shed quarters, and like we didn't even have like light fixtures. I mean, it was pretty hardcore, but I love that job. So I spent 2 years at ElliptiGO. Brian and Brent developed the bike over 5 years, and then hired some of their first sales employees down in San Diego. Brian and I were up in Northern California. I was sort of a generalist in the beginning, kind of went on to become director of marketing. And over a 2 year period, we launched the product. We launched a whole new category. In our minds, we launched a whole new sport. And then kind of, so I want to show some pictures and sort of tell you a little bit more of this story. So here was Shed Quarters. A little bit about the inventors, so Brian and Brent. The picture on the upper left, that's what they called Alpha. That was like literally the first outdoor elliptical bike that Brent built in his garage. So the quick story is Brian was a former Marine, super triathlete guy, had blown out his knees by age 30, could no longer run, stuck in the gym, hated it. And he was just like, why can't we build an elliptical machine and let me go outside again? And so Brent was like this genius engineer. He's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so over, I think it was 5 years, they went from like this like kind of souped up bike with like wooden platforms to like actual pedals to manufacturing it. And then the picture at the bottom right, that's Brian and Brent like on the product that we launched. And, I think the pictures are awesome and they definitely tell the story. But what I'd like to do is actually show you a video from when we launched the bike.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so here is the video. I won't show you the whole thing. I'll just kind of talk through the first minute. And you should know that about 14 seconds in, there's a very fit woman in a purple shirt that bikes by. Don't blink or you'll miss me, because that's me in the launch video. All right, here we go.
Brian and I set out to create a machine that didn't exist in the world for a very diverse group of people. Joggers, runners, casual cruisers, professional athletes, men, women. So after 5 years and many design iterations, we have a super fun, high-performance machine that anybody can get a great, low-impact running workout outdoors.
So we ended up with a machine that's just so much superior to what's found in the gym because we really diagnosed the essence of running and how we could emulate it on one of these systems. We need a much longer stride length than what you typically find at the gym, and you need a much different recovery stroke than what you typically find at the gym. And so we made those implementations into our system to make it feel much more like running. It's so easy to ride, it's so low impact.
Cool. So that's the ElliptiGO. That was our launch video. Yeah, and so I mentioned over a 2-year period, we launched, my claim to fame is that I hosted the world's first outdoor elliptical biking world championships. And then about 2 years in, we'd just crossed over to have our first month of profitability. We were starting to ship bikes to Europe. It was growing. But at that point, my functional fit was no longer a fit for me. I'd sort of siloed myself into a marketing role, and I loved that team. I loved that product, but I didn't love marketing. And so I left the company to try to figure out what was next. And for me, what I left behind was marketing at an early stage startup, but what I carried with me was working with founders. I'd fallen in love with it and I wanted to keep doing it, and I just needed to figure out how. So that's how I became a coach. Now, startup coaching, founder coaching, at this point, as we almost enter into 2021, is very common. There are a lot of coaches out there, and it's good because there are a lot of founders out there, and there's not enough coaches to kind of fulfill all their needs. But when I started coaching in 2011, there were literally I could count on one hand the number of startup coaches in San Francisco, executive coaches who focused exclusively on startups. Because it is really different. It is really different when you're a team of 5 or 10 or 100 versus these corporate executive coaches who are used to working with much larger enterprises. So I launched my practice as Foothold Coaching. And then over the last decade, I've evolved into, I had a coaching company partnership with another coach at Fort Light. And then most recently, I just relaunched my solo practice where I finally decided to be me and my own brand. So that's been kind of over the last 10 years. So I always tell the story that I set out to become the startup focused coach I never had because I had known about executive coaching and I think I would have benefited from it a tremendous amount. But for me, it was you saw my office, I worked in a shed. I didn't connect with this idea of corporate executive coaching. But I realized that this could be really a really helpful modality to people, even when they're still working in a shed. And I wanted to kind of fill that gap in the market.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I became a coach. And now I'd love to just really quickly kind of share with you, Ray, you probably even know some of these folks, but just a few of the inventors and innovators, both of them, that I've been excited to work with over the last 10 years. So just a couple of quick stories. So this is Alyssa. I've coached Alyssa, I want to say 5 or 6 years now. She's the founder and CEO of Hip Camp. So if anybody enjoys camping, you have to know about this company. Alyssa, I would say, is definitely in that innovator bucket. She created a marketplace for people to camp on private land. So campers who, are sick of competing for camping reservations on public land. Now she's kind of nationwide opened up all this private land for campers to camp on in these really unique spots, whether it's true tent camping or RV camping or whatever it might be. And then on the supply side, she's just like become this hero to landowners because there's these landowners that like need to generate revenue from their land and usually are forced to either like develop it or sell it to kind of pay for, you know, their daily lives. But instead they can have campers come, and it's this very eco-friendly, lightweight way to use the land and generate revenue and share it with people who really appreciate it. And so she invented this whole marketplace. There's been other companies that have come in since, but that's been like a really exciting company to be a part of.
That's awesome. Yeah, I tried it for the first time during COVID when all the national parks that I would have wanted to go to were shut down. So it's pretty cool. I like the, you know, Airbnb for camping kind of style. It's really, really awesome.
Yeah. So let's see, who else? Here's Julia. I think you've met Julia, Ray.
Yeah.
So Julia, I coached Julia. She was my second client ever. So I started working with her back in 2011. And back then her company Lark was definitely in more of that like hardware device space. They were one of the first players to have like a wearable sleep tracker. You know, now everybody has that, but like back then they were one of the major players. They were carried in the Apple Store. Like I still remember like leaving Starbucks where she and I were coaching each other, and we'd walk to the Apple Store and like look at her product and where it was placed on the shelf. It was so cool.
Wow.
And then over time, like they started to realize that AI and chatbots were going to be like the future. And so they kind of pivoted into that and evolved into that. So now if you go to Lark's site, it doesn't have the hardware piece anymore. It's really just about the phone. But they've kind of developed through AI this amazing way to help people at home manage their chronic disease in a way that lowers healthcare costs, like, you know, gets people into more and more preventive healthcare services. And it's just really cool to see sort of what she's done and how she's pivoted and reinvented herself and her company over, you know, more than a decade at this point. And they're really like starting to get traction and take off now, which is really cool to see. Another one is these two women, Ryan and Julie. They actually started working with me when they were both still students at business school, but they were very committed to their partnership, they're co-CEOs, and so they wanted to work with a coach kind of from very early on. They are tackling the prenatal nutrition market. And again, maybe not an invention in the sense that they didn't invent prenatal vitamins. That's been existing, I think, since the 1940s or 1950s. But what they found is that even though like 97% of women take prenatal vitamins when they're pregnant, there's often studies that nutritionists do where they'll see that like something like 95% of women don't actually have enough like proper nutrients that they should have for their stage, for themselves and for the baby that they're gestating. And so like for them, it was just this huge, like almost health justice issue and also like a huge opportunity. So they developed their own, it's like a line of prenatal products, including a lot of like powders. So you kind of mix it into smoothies rather than like popping vitamins, because that's not as effective as a way to kind of optimize your nutrition and nutrient dosing. So they just launched this summer, and so they're kind of more new on the scene, but I'm really excited for kind of what they're doing. And then truth be told, I sort of was putting all these pictures together and like getting excited about the stories, and I realized I've only told you stories about women, so lest any of the men watching feel left out, my actual coaching practice is about half men, half women, so it is pretty even. So I decided to kind of compensate for my lack of men. I should pick my manliest masculine client. I don't know if you've heard of man crates before, Raymond. Have you heard of man?
No, I have not.
Okay, might be time to tell Gabby, but
Okay.
so man crates, I would definitely put it in the innovation category, but or maybe reinvention if we want to add that as a category, but they essentially reinvented gift giving for men. So if you think about like gift giving, like typically people think of like flowers that you send your mom on Mother's Day, or you know, a box of chocolates, or maybe like that awkward, you know, pear and cheese basket that sometimes, you know, your parents send at Christmas to people they don't know well but have to send gifts to.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sam, who's pictured here, he was the CTO and co-founder, along with a guy named John, of Man Crates. And they said, you know what, we could do this better and we could open up like gift giving for men. So they really played into some of like the masculine stereotypes, but they work and they're clever and they're entertaining and they delight the men that open these gifts. So they've built essentially like, you know, like they have jerky boxes and knife sharpening kits and all sorts of things that you would sort of stereotypically associate with guys. But the other thing they do is they package all their gifts in crates that you have to open with a crowbar. Yeah, I was trying to find a video to show you, but so it's not just like, you know, like, oh, cute, like the thing with the wrapping. It's like you get this thing. And like I've had guys, like friends of mine tell me like, oh yeah, you know, my girlfriend sent me one at the office and it became this thing where I had to like pry it open with a crowbar and it was like fun. And, you know, again, it's sort of just this reinventing of this old thing. You know, gift giving is an old thing, but they've done it really well and they're doing really well to this day. I mean, Sam's moved on from the company, but John's still operating it. And
wow. I love the idea of making it harder to open as a value proposition.
Exactly. Yeah. And they have, I was looking at their catalog last night when I was prepping, and they have gifts in ammo cans. I mean, it's crazy. So,
Thanks.
you know, obviously
It's like the equivalent of like the resurgence of vinyl. Like everyone's like, no, I want it to be a real pain to listen to my music. It's like, no, I want to have to smash open a box.
yeah.
Crowbar.
So anyways, I wanted to spend some time talking about my clients because you know, it's easy as a coach for people to think you're the hero of your story, but I'm not. Like, it's them, you know, like they're the heroes of all of this. And I'm just like behind the scenes trying to do what I can to help. And all of these folks just, you know, it brings me great joy to like talk about them and what they've accomplished. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of some of the folks I coach. And, you know, over the last 10 years, I've coached probably, I should really run these numbers. I'm thinking it's probably between 45 and 50 founders. And, you know, in that time, you know, each founder is definitely a unique special snowflake for sure. And there's also definitely patterns at the same time. So I wanted to speak to some of those things, because I think that can be helpful for folks that are maybe just getting started on this or thinking about it or down that road, to start to think through, what are some of the patterns out there as a coach? Like, what do I see in inventors and innovators alike? So this is kind of some of the things I've thought through that I thought might be interesting to share. And maybe what I'll do, Ray, is just kind of speak to each really briefly, and then you can tell me where you want to double click or talk more.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll let you get through the list first, though.
Yeah. So the first thing is, like, I call this beautiful founder-ness because I love this stuff. I mean, as some of this stuff is not great, but we'll talk about it. But this is sort of what I associate with people. And I can't tell you how many times when I'm coaching someone, like on some level, one of the most helpful things I offer to people is validation that they're not the only one that struggles with this, or they're not the only one that thinks like this. And so I've decided to call it beautiful founder-ness because I want people to like embrace these parts of themselves. Because then they can figure out like what serves them and what doesn't. But so one of the biggest things is that a lot of founders, I think almost by definition, they have what I call cognitive distortions. And what cognitive distortions are in psychology is essentially like seeing the world just like a slightly different way. Some might say a biased way, but you know, others might say just a different way. So founders have a lot of cognitive distortions. It's what enables them to see that opening in the marketplace or to see that opportunity to invent something. So things like black and white thinking, or this sort of heightened sense of agency that by most people's standards is unrealistic, but it's actually what helps them get through. I think another thing to keep in mind is that, you know, of all those stories I showed you, you know, all of those people were at their companies 5 or 10 plus years. And I think especially going back to our conversation earlier about when you're an inventor first and then you transition into innovator, now we're talking about like 8, 12, 20 years, right? Like the founders of ElliptiGO, I mean, they were working on that bike for 5 years before they hired me as their first hire. Like, wow. So I think that's the thing. And I say that not to kind of validate, because I think sometimes people are like, man, we've been slogging away for 8 years and I feel like we've done nothing. And I can kind of come in and say, well, no, that's not true. You know, like maybe that was the first 8 years and maybe the next 8 years will look different, or maybe you'll play a different role. But you know, just thinking about the time scale here, because I think so often the media portrays these like quote overnight successes, but any overnight success, you dig a little deeper, was years, if not decades in the making. And I think that's something that often gets lost. I think the other thing about founders is they're just relentless. Some of them would identify as getting bored easily. I'm not quite sure that that's it, but they're just relentless and they're always tinkering and they always want things to be better. One of the things that makes founders awesome to work with as a coach is that same sort of natural inclination to experiment, whether it's with a prototype or in the lab. It's so easy for me to say, like, let's turn that on yourself. Let's run an experiment. What's your hypothesis? Okay, what evidence are you looking for? And it makes them really fun to coach because they're always like up for like, okay, what do I want to try next? Most founders I work with have a really strong disobedient streak, which I've also both learned to love and also kind of naturally love. Like, they just have a very healthy disregard for the rules. And I'd say they're just disagreeable enough to like have achieved the success that they have. So, I've had clients who, even try to break my rules. Like, do I have to use this template? Do I have to do this? And it's just like, it's kind of like they can't not break rules. And I've learned to kind of appreciate that and work with it and sort of hold boundaries when I need to. But I think that's something that sometimes people try to squash out of you. And I try to protect it and nurture it because I think it serves them. Another thing about founders, I would say maybe especially the inventors-turned-founders, is generally speaking, they haven't been managed well before. Like they don't come from larger companies where they've been like nurtured and apprenticed and managed by people who knew what they were doing. Like sometimes in the case of like a hard science startup, they came straight from like a PhD program where they were in, probably a pretty subpar like management experience with an advisor, if not like downright like traumatic experiences being managed and led.
Indentured servitude.
Is that what it's called now? Okay. Yeah. So there's that, or they're young, and they founded this company fresh out of grad school or fresh out of college, or, they worked for 1 or 2 years somewhere and then they got together with somebody and started something. So I think that creates some challenges, right? Because they don't have their own playbook to pull from, but also some opportunities because that's sort of where I can come in and give them boot camps and crash courses and help them figure out, how they want to lead, and not kind of just carry forward bad examples. I put the term manifestors in quote because I think there's something, I haven't found a better word for it yet, but the memory I have is when I would take the ElliptiGO on the road. So I was head of marketing. So I was doing all the fitness product exhibits and all the booths and all the demos. And I can't tell you how like every time I would do this, there'd be some guy, older guy, he'd come up and he'd kind of scrutinize the bike and he'd say, oh yeah, I like sketched that out 10 years ago. Or like, oh, I had that idea. And like, I just, at a certain point, I would be like, yeah, but you didn't do it, bro. Like, it was just like this sort of like, I kind of just got tired of people like informing me that they had this idea. And what I realized is it's because the founders who are successful are the ones who don't just, they have the idea, like they have the rock, but they throw it in the water, like, and the risk that comes with that or the vulnerability that comes with that, like they do it and they're somehow able to get over themselves enough so they can. And I think that's important. I think it's like something about that ability to manifest something, to not just think of it, but actually execute on it and take on all that exposure that comes with it. I think that really sets the successful founders apart. And this last one is this conundrum that I see a lot, that I'm coaching on a lot, which is when I encounter a founder who really ties their own self-worth up with the company. And I think the conundrum here is that I think to a certain extent in the very early stage of a venture, that belief can be helpful. Like it can serve them. Like I've actually been told by some angel investors that they sort of lightly screen for this because they know that if somebody's tying up their self-worth in their venture, they're going to work really hard. They're going to pull out all the stops. They're going to do everything they can. Yeah. The problem is that doesn't scale. Right. And the second you need to start managing people, hiring an exec team, anything past maybe like a Series A, Series B, like that falls apart. And then you get burnout and you get, people who can't manage an executive team well, or who actually are under hiring because they're afraid of, what it's going to look like when they finally bring in people who know what they're doing. Or you get founders that are so afraid of failing that they stop taking risks over time because it would just be too personally humiliating for them. So I think there's this weird trick where you have to kind of have this sort of mindset in the beginning, and then you have to work as quickly as you can while you're working, kind of building a company in the meantime, to get over it and disentangle your self-worth from your company so that you can then succeed kind of in a later stage company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing.
So
well, I think I check all the boxes.
Did you say you checked the boxes?
Yeah. So I'm like trying to figure out which one to double click on, because I'm just sitting there going, yep, got that one. Yep, got that one. But I think the one that would maybe be most useful for other folks watching this, I'm curious if you have a simple framing for this courage to experiment on yourself, because I think that's I think a lot of people watching this will they're engineers, they're scientists, they get the form a hypothesis and test. And so then how do you take that and apply that to yourself?
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is self-coaching. And I think it can be really simple. Like it could be something as simple as every Friday or every Sunday or every Monday, like you have a weekly ritual where you take some steps to reflect on the week, like from a work perspective, like what did I try? What did I get done? Where did I get stuck? Things like that. And then you sort of turn that reflection onto yourself. Like maybe you start to pick up on a trend, like, oh, wow, I'm very distractible. I mean, maybe that's something you want to get better at. Like, how do I push away all these things that are grabbing at my attention and just really focus on like laser focus every day? Am I getting done the most important, highest leverage thing right now for where the venture needs to go? And so you might sort of create a hypothesis like, okay, if I try this, this will help me stay focused. Or if I try this, and then let's say that's week 1, Friday, right? And then by the end of week 2, when it swings back around to the Friday reflection, you say, okay, and it's just really simple. What did I try? What did I learn? What do I want to try next? You just repeat those 3 questions. What did I try? I tried like turning off my email and not looking at email the first, thing that when I got into the lab that morning or whatever. What did I learn? Oh, email's not that important. If I don't check it until noon, nothing blows up. That's cool, right? What do I want to try next? Could I do a whole day without email? Or, is there something, could I have certain people be on call for me so that like I don't have to be triaging email? It's kind of a very small tactical example with the email, but I think it's just that ability to do that. And I think the courage part comes in when you don't try the thing, but you still do the reflection, right? So maybe week 3, you were supposed to try all these things around your attention management, but the week got away from you and you didn't do it. And where a lot of people wimp out is they then don't do the reflection. They just stop, they give up, right? But where the courage to experiment comes in is you write down like, I said I would do this and I didn't. And then you pause and you say, what got in my way? Where is the resistance coming from? And then what can I learn from that? Because I think that's one of the key things about coaching is that even when my clients, quote unquote, don't do their homework, there's a lot of really useful data in that. And I'm not like a school teacher that's like, oh, you didn't do your homework, minus points. I'm like, you didn't do your homework. Let's dig in. Like, why not? What held you back? What got in the way? What does that say? So I think someone can do that on their own. They don't need a coach to do it. They just need sort of that commitment and that courage to kind of confront themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think to maybe connect it to the disobedient streak, I think, and this sort of like cognitive distortion a little bit, right, is like a lot of inventors, they really will resist like homework, so to speak, or being told what to do. And so I think I like that idea of just getting curious about, like, it's okay. I didn't do my homework. I'm not like a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what is that telling me that I had this resistance to following through with that thing? And can I at least, notice that on like a mindfulness level, and then sort of self-compassionately say, okay, like that's like that's what happened, and what do I want to do next?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think anything you can do to stay out of any sort of a shame spiral, a shallow one or a deep one, and get into curiosity and learning. I have worked with a coach throughout my coaching career, and I remember when I was building one of my coaching practices, and I was having a really hard time, and I said, "God, I'm just screwing it up," and he like immediately leaned in and he said, "You know what? You're not screwing it up. You're figuring it out." And for me, I need to make I need to like crochet a sweater with that on it because it's like such a mantra for me that I can go back to. Because if you go to that place where you're screwing it up, you're not learning, you're not making progress, you're not figuring out what to do next, right? But if you go to that place where you're like, oh, I'm figuring it out, that's going to put you in that mindset. And so the less minutes or hours or days you log in like shame or beating yourself up, the better.
I love that. Let's get that sweater. I'll buy one.
Oh, that could be like a good holiday, holiday Anamaria branded thing. We'll see.
Awesome. That's amazing. Okay, well, I know you have a whole second section of your what are we calling it? Scrapbook here, not slideshow. So I want to make sure we have enough time to hear about your approach to inventive coaching.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's go. There you are, Ray. I needed to put the.
Oh, I forgot about that version of me.
That's a Princess and the Frog shout out for anybody who's following at home. Okay, so let's talk about inventive coaching. So I really struggled with this because I alluded to that earlier of this idea that like I want to reserve inventor for the people who clearly do invent things, and I think it's really tempting as a coach to think you've invented something, but the honest truth is like there's been a lot of people studying psychology, human psychology, organizational development for many years. So most of the things that you'll see in the coaching world are generally beautifully packaged, reframed old wisdom. And there's something okay with that, but like let's not kid ourselves that these are inventors. So I go with inventive coaching because that is very much my style. I think one of my core values is to be generative and is to create help that actually helps. And I think part of my role, therefore, as a coach is not just to deliver coaching, but to be simultaneously thinking about what needs to be created in the world to kind of help the people that I want to help. And so I'm always thinking about both of those at the same time. And it typically, for me, similar to kind of the inventor story, it usually starts with one very specific person who has a problem that I don't see a solution for, that I can just give them. And so if I can't just give it to them, sometimes I'll try to make it for them. So one example, going back to Julia from Lark, is I have this very vivid memory of sitting in the Starbucks with her, and we were talking about emotion regulation. And she was just like taking a bunch of notes. She's like, oh my gosh, this stuff is so good. Like, how do you learn emotion regulation? And I sat back in my chair and I thought, one of the most powerful things I've done to work on emotion regulation is this T group weekend. And this was part of the interpersonal dynamics course that I took when I was a student at the Stanford Business School. It's a legendary course there. So I was telling her a little bit about the course and she said, yeah, but I can't just like go to Stanford Business School. Like, how do I get this as a founder CEO of like a growing startup? And again, I thought, like maybe I could just do a T group weekend for Julia and 10 other founders. Like that was sort of my initial idea. And at the time, I think a couple of facilitators had taken the methodology out of Stanford. Stanford didn't invent T groups. T groups kind of predates all of that. And I certainly didn't either. But again, in that sort of spirit of innovation, I took this thing that for, all intents and purposes were sort of trapped in the business school and like liberated it and then kind of rearrange the content to really hone in on the stuff that was most relevant to startup founders and startup leaders. So that was, it was 6 years ago. My co-founder Michael and I ran the first T group weekend for startup leaders in my living room. Like I used to bake the cookies for it. And Julia was there in the very first group. And, that was 6 years ago. So we've since run 23 T group weekends. And we just did the math, like it's 233 startup leaders that have graduated from our program. That's how I met you, Ray. And I think it's just a really amazing methodology for I kind of describe it as like a hackathon where you go for this intense weekend with these really smart people, but instead of like a hackathon where you're creating like a software product, the product you're working on is you as a leader, your own intrapersonal psychology and your interpersonal skills. So that would be to me like sort of a cool example of taking a more inventive approach to coaching.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let's see other examples. I had a client, not Sam from Man Creates, but another client named Sam, who I coached for a couple years, and he once told me that one of the most helpful things I ever did for him was help him create, he called it his pit crew, almost like he was the race car driver, and sort of helped him build like this really robust, interconnected group of people to be in his support crew. And so I was thinking about this the other day, and I said, like, I don't think, at least to my knowledge, I haven't seen someone really map out like, here's what the ideal founder support crew looks like, let alone like put it in a bingo game. And so I thought, I'm going to do both. And so I put the URL here so anybody who's following along can jump on anamaria.coach/downloads and get these support crew bingo cards. But it's essentially a playful way to kind of map out, it's hard to form a support crew, and you can't really form one if you don't even know what profiles you're looking for. So that's sort of how I put this together. And that's kind of something new that I don't think I've seen before. So I think I get to say I invented it. I don't know.
I think you invented it. I played, just for those who don't know, I played this bingo on Friday, just a few days ago. And it's currently my favorite form of bingo. And I don't mean to brag, but I did get bingo first before anybody else did.
True.
I will say I would encourage folks to download this because I think it was very eye-opening for me in terms of my sort of blind spots in terms of, okay, here are the areas where I am very intentional and sort of strategic about my network, my personal support structures, and then here are all the ones where, I'm not, let's say, not doing the greatest job, or I sort of, that isn't, I don't know, one of my priorities. And so, yeah, I can vouch for it being a eye-opening game. It may not be fun. It really is a lot of internal reflection. But I think you'll learn a lot about yourself in playing the game, whether or not you have fun.
Yeah, we might need to work on the ad copy for that, but no, it's true. And I also I have a bootstrapper version, which, especially if anybody, listening in is kind of super early stage, like don't even really have a full team yet. Mm-hmm. In some ways, forming that support crew when you're in that bootstrapper mode is arguably even more important because you're sort of laying the foundation for what's to come. So it's free, go download it, email me if you have questions about what I mean by any of that. But I think it's just helpful to kind of sort of know what you're aiming at. So much of invention and innovation is making it up as you go, that anytime you can get a hack or a shortcut or a bingo card, I think it's helpful.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So another example is, so this is this connection chart that I built.
Ooh, this is my favorite of your inventions.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Oh yeah.
So the image on the left is the feelings chart, which I did not invent. There's lots of examples of emotion words, but this is a very well-loved document in, especially among our T groups and in our manager trainings that we've done historically. And it basically gives people, the feelings chart just gives people some vocabulary for emotions to kind of build their emotion granularity, which is a super important skill. But I had this very distinct memory. There was a founder who was attending a T group weekend, and he kept like looking at the feelings chart. He's like, this is so useful. And then we were talking about the concept of emotional bids, which is sort of how people actually make a bid to connect with someone else. And he felt like he was just super blind to all the ways in which people were making bids to connect with him. And he said, I need the feelings chart, but for connection. And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, God, I don't even know where I would start with that. But it took me a couple years to sort of put it together. But over time, just having watched T groups, having watched startup teams in action, I felt confident enough to say like, okay, here's a connections chart. And so the font probably is a little bit small on your screen, but again, you can go to the downloads URL and download it. But I came up with 43 plus 44 in the COVID version, ways to connect. And what I, well, actually, I'll let Ray, because Ray's actually done this before, so maybe he should speak to it a little more objectively. But I will say, like, what I like about it is it just gives words to things. Like, again, we're so often making stuff up as we go, but when you're given a piece of paper that says, hey, here's 40 ways people might be trying to connect with you, it can immediately sort of illuminate either ways that you're trying that aren't working or ways that they're trying that aren't working. And connection is really at the foundation of all the things that people want: influence, communication, leadership, delegation. So if you're striking out with connection, like that's usually where we would want to start first. But Ray, I don't know, you've played around with this, so you tell me what you think.
Yeah, I have used it, and it's I think it was really eye-opening for me. I'm connecting it back to something you said around like the biggest, one of the biggest services that you can provide, so to speak, to someone is just let them know that they're not alone. And I think that really resonates with my experience with looking at this. And I think the most vivid example was when I was doing this exercise. Part of the exercise was which of these like don't work for you, like that you notice other people are trying that just don't work for you. And for me, I remember one of them was like complimenting on your appearance or something like that. And I just remember being like, yeah, that's all, like my whole life that's always just been something where I've always felt like awkward. It's like the first thing that someone says when they see is like, oh, you look great, or like, oh, I like your shirt or whatever. And for me, that's not a way that I don't know, that's not a way that I feel connected, I guess. And just sort of having this to be able to see like, oh, okay, I like now through this lens, I can see how like that is how for this person they're trying.
Yeah.
Like that's their bid, that's their way of connecting with other people, and like that also doesn't work for me. And just being aware of it makes it just easier to say, thank you, and understand where they're coming from, rather than being like, really, like I don't, it's not really a very nice shirt, it's just a white v-neck. But just being able to I guess see it as a bid and honor it as a bid, even if it's not my favorite type of bid, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And every time I use this tool, like especially as like a group activity, it's just so insightful. Like within an hour, teammates that have worked together for years are like, "Oh, that's why you do that thing," or "Oh, I've been missing that all these months or years." And again, like I think things happen at startup speed so much that if you can generate like an interpersonal breakthrough with that kind of lightning efficiency, it's so powerful for people, and it can really. Yeah, because if you feel more connected with people, everything gets easier, feedback, conflict, disagreement, influence, working late at night, stressful situations. Like if you feel more in it with people, more connected, you can do anything. So anyways, this is one of my favorite things that I've created over the years. And yeah.
I love that. And the one thing I just we've talked about this before, and I think it was a big moment for me last year. I'm trying to remember the book that I read this in, but this idea of like, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the nurtured. Right. And this idea of like, yeah, it's tough to be, in a startup, and like that, like, this connection, this idea of helping foster a team that does feel connected to each other, like that's the path to doing something big. That's the path to being efficient, not like, okay, we gotta do this. So anyways, I just wanted to share that connection.
Cool. Yeah, no, totally. So For those listening at home, like go to the downloads page. I made a version for COVID. So I went through I have my old version and then a new one in the world of, physical distancing. You can use it by yourself just for your own insight, or you can use it with your team. It's kind of ready to go off the shelf. So I think the last thing I wanted to share is I think as a coach, often coaches start to see patterns and then they start to kind of, I would say, like coin terms or create a concept that has some stickiness to it and some resonance to it. And I think that's a way that I think coaches are inventive, even if they're not inventing, a concept, just coining a term in a certain way so that's more memorable and more seeable and more easy to name can be really high impact for clients. So I have a lot of these, but the one that I wanted to share is something I say. I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, Ray, but I often say like trios or triangles. So sometimes I'm coaching like 3 members of an executive team, or sometimes I'm coaching 3 co-founders. And what I find is if you look at, I just kind of scribbled this out on a piece of paper, but what I find is that oftentimes, let's take a like trio of co-founders in an early stage company, is they sort of assume that like, person B, A, and C, that they're all kind of the same. Like we're all co-founders, therefore we're all equal.
Yeah.
And that's really not the case. Like it's never the case.
Right.
Anytime you have 3 people, you're gonna have a triangle formation. It's just a matter of, what is the setting? What's the specific situation? Where is the company in its growth? Who's playing what role? So even if we assume in these diagrams that like A is the CEO, you might have the classic like CEO with the 2 flanks, or maybe you have a CEO with a more senior person and then a kind of more junior member. But what I find is a really helpful tool is just 1, naming that for people. 2, whether it's on their own or as part of the trio, actually having them draw the triangle. Like, how do you experience it? How do you want the other 2 members to be experiencing it? And what gaps do we need to fill? And so it can be a really powerful just concept to give people and to start talking about power, because I think power is at the root of a lot of co-founder tension. And it's because people don't have words or frames for first how to think about it and then how to talk about it. So, like in that 3rd diagram down, like if you're person B and you're like, this is my experience, and meanwhile A and C think that the triangle is a different way, this is a way to get together and talk about it and say like, how do we want this to be and what do we need to do to either even out our power dynamic or clarify the ways in which it needs to be more stratified, for example, around certain decisions or around certain parts of the company.
Yeah. That's awesome. No, I haven't seen this one before. So this one is really cool. And I can immediately think of many examples of this. So I guess I want to just, I want to transition with a question, and I want to use this as a heads up to get the live audience thinking about what their questions are for you.
Yeah.
And I will request that folks ask the questions in the Q&A instead of in the chat, because it's just a little bit easier to keep track of and administrate. But while folks are thinking about their questions, I have a question, which is, do you think that we'll see a virtual or COVID safe version of T Group?
Well, some people are already running them. From me, I don't know. I've heard mixed things. I've heard that it's really hard it's kind of this balance of if you've done a T group before in person, you know that it's just this way less awesome version, right? So there's that weighed against, gosh, but all these founders are trying to run leadership team offsites via Zoom, and they're trying to run meetings via Zoom. So I'm not really sure where it's going to shake out at this point. My personal decision has been to kind of at least wait till June or fall next year.
Okay.
Fingers crossed. Maybe there will be vaccines widespread enough by then. But if not, I think I would be more likely to bring back in-person masked T groups in my backyard in the summer. before I would do virtual.
Okay. Yeah. No, just curious because it's I can see how there what's the right way of saying it? The medium is the message in many ways, and it's I think it would certainly not be the same
Yeah.
virtually.
Yeah, and I mean, I say that now, but I think what is definitely on the table is like T group style experiences, or maybe like, okay, how do I give somebody a 2-hour version via Zoom? That I think, talk to me in like January, February next year, and I bet I'll be at something like that, inventing something like that. But I don't know if it's going to be like a 4-day weekend over Zoom. I don't think I'm up for that. I don't know if the participants would be either. But yeah, stay tuned for something. Something will happen in Q1. I just don't know yet, but it will be.
Okay. No, that's amazing. Just curious about this. Okay, so once again, an invitation for the live audience to add your questions to the Q&A section, and I will read the very first one from anonymous attendee. Very mysterious. I love it.
I love it.
What is the most important thing you've learned that every startup should be aware of?
Oh.
10 years into one thing.
Every single startup should be aware of. Okay, here's one. So I think that, like, even if you're a solo founder, first of all, if you found with other people, this is highly relevant to you. But even if you're a solo founder, I think many, if not all, startup founders kind of fall for this idea that the people I found the company with are sort of the people I'm going to go the distance with, and it's just not true. And I don't say that to bum people out. I say that because it's real and true. Like, I actually was sort of informally running the numbers even on the companies that I've worked with over the last 10 years. And I think it was, I'm going to fudge the numbers a little bit, but it was something like after 5 years, only one out of every 8 companies had the same founders at the company in the same C-level roles, right? Which is to say, like, a tiny minority, really.
Yeah.
And yet, like, if we were to go back and ask those people in like 6 months in, like, hey, are you guys all going the distance together? All of them would be like, yeah, for sure, right? And so I think that's one thing that all startups should be aware of, is that the team you have now is probably not going to be the team you have. And so what therefore shakes out from that is not being afraid to have those conversations, whether it's initially about getting on the same page around expectations, engaging more robustly in feedback practice. Because what I've seen too often is, let's say there's like a pair of co-founders and one of them becomes CEO and the other becomes something else. And then over time, the person that becomes something else is feeling less relevant. And meanwhile, the CEO is feeling lonely. Like, there's just a lot of issues that come up. And it's because I think they're so afraid of confronting the possibility that one or both might leave, that they hide from it. And then they end up creating a far worse situation where like years pass and people get blindsided or feel really betrayed. I would say that's the number one thing, is that the team you start with isn't necessarily the team you'll be with 5 years from now, or certainly finish with, and that's okay, and that you almost have to design everything accordingly.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really wise advice. And the thing it makes me think of is Jeff's comment of, like, people kind of scaling in steps. Yeah. And sort of having, I totally agree with you that if you can't name that first, then how are you gonna, like, if it's unspoken assumption, like these co-founders are going all the way, the whole way, then how can you reset expectations? How can you even start to have the conversation when this isn't working, or we need to switch things up? So,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Another anonymous question. It may be a different anonymous attendee. It may be the same. We don't know because it's anonymous. What is the best way to motivate a team?
So I would say I'm going to turn this question a little bit on its head and say that if you are leading a startup team, by design, like the people that sign up to work for you are usually very intrinsically motivated already. Like they've taken a pay cut to come work for you, or they've fallen in love with your product or mission. So they're like, yeah, I want to do this. Like they already come to you with a lot of motivation. So I usually flip this question on its head and say, like, how do you as a leader just get out of the way so you don't demotivate people? Because that's what usually happens, right? So some things to keep in mind as to how to not demotivate your already naturally motivated people. Number one, super clear expectations. Like that is like the number one thing where I see a lot of founders get it wrong because maybe they don't know what they expect. They're like afraid of coming across as too demanding, or they just are moving so quickly they don't slow down enough to realize that people can't read their mind about what they mean by quality or speed or this or that. And so if you can slow all that down, give yourself permission to really be clear about what you need and what you expect, and take the time to do it, whether it be like really walking through like here's the key metric and here's the context around why you need to achieve it in this time. Or it could be sort of more of like a social contract, like, hey, I expect us to be really tightly collaborative around this effort, and here's what I mean by tightly collaborative, and actually explain it, because too many founders just, they'll say things that are buzzwordy, like, I just really need you to be a rock star here, or I really need you to be a problem solver. And the person who's like super motivated to come work for you is like, okay, cool, yeah. And then they walk and they have no idea what that means. What does it mean to be a rock star? What does it mean to be a problem solver? Does it mean I should never bother you if I'm struggling at all? No, you should bother me, but for stuff that's like above this barrier, but below this, you should be solving on your own. You know, like you got to kind of get down into that granularity. So I'd say the number one thing that tends to demotivate startup employees is when they are like suffering under unclear expectations, because then what happens is they think they're doing a good job, or maybe they feel like they're drowning, but either way, then they get sort of this like corrective feedback. And then they're like, wait, but you never told me that that's what you expected. So I think that's a big one. Other things that demotivate people are like not feeling like they have agency, not feeling connected to their team, not feeling like they can influence the goals or see their connections, and not receiving positive feedback. And this point's really important to me. When I say positive feedback, I don't mean vague praise. Like vague praise is actually a pretty inefficient way. I mean like drilling into like, hey, Raymond, like not just nice work on that thing, but it's like, hey, nice work on that thing. And I really appreciated how you did this. And it was better than this. And like, how did you come up with that? And how can you coach the rest of your team to be doing that? Like really drilling into like very specific feedback. Like ask yourself, what is the behavior I want to reinforce here? Because that, even the person who's most allergic to praise will take that in and they'll feel good about it. And then they'll can, what's the word? Propel more motivation forward. So yeah, I think the key thing is accept that people are naturally motivated and just don't demotivate them. Make expectations clear, feedback, and all of that stuff. And that's going to kind of keep propelling people forward.
Yeah, that's great. The one thing I want to add to that, which I think is particularly relevant in the work from home world, is it's super easy asynchronously, whether you're like a Slack team or a whatever Basecamp team, in text, right? It's super easy to, rocket ship emoji them, or, money bags them, or whatever your favorite, thing is for kind of good job. And that's fine, and it has its place, and I think it's fun to get those little positive boosts. But I think it's even more important when you're not seeing each other in person to take the time to like you said, get very specific about like what the hell does rocket ship emoji mean? Right? It's like when you did X, I felt rocket ship emoji because I really saw you like taking ownership of this thing, or I really, I was happy that you solved the problem without blowing up my phone, or, you know, whatever the thing that you're trying to encourage is. I think it's harder to do in a purely text-based kind of everybody's remote world. And so I just want to add that thought. Okay, so we got a couple more questions from the audience, and then I have a few closing questions for you, Anamaria, and then we will let you get on with your busy day, and really appreciate the time you spent with us. So,
great.
So Kamala asked, what is the best way to introduce my team to the feelings chart? What is the best way to start using it?
Cool. Okay, let's see. Hey, Kamala. So one easy way that I've found is in a one-on-one setting. So you start with, like, let's say you do a one-on-one with a direct report, or maybe you just kind of more casually check in with people on the team. You would start by kind of showing them a copy of the feelings chart, saying, hey, like, I want to play around with this new tool. You can kind of keep it lighthearted. And what you might say is, you know, usually, now this is me supposing that this is usually what happens, but oftentimes in one-on-ones, people will be like, how's it going? You know, what are the blockers you're facing? Or like, that's kind of a key thing of like, let's open up this communication pathway. But the feedback chart gives you quite literally like wider vocabulary. So you might say like one option could be, you know, take a few minutes and just look at this feelings chart and circle some of the emotions you've felt about work over the last week, and just like let them circle. And you could offer to do it too, right? Because it's a little bit of a vulnerable activity, and say, like, I'm going to do it too. And then it sort of evens out the power dynamic. And then you might go first and say, like, yeah, so one thing I felt excited about was this, and I felt annoyed by this thing that was happening with the investors. And then I felt worried about this thing we needed to ship, or what it might be. And then they go and they kind of similarly like express precise emotions and tie it to moments they've had at work. And then you can kind of take the conversation from there, because what you're combating is, number one, people just don't feel comfortable talking about emotions, and yet emotions are really important data in the workplace. Number two, they don't always feel like it's safe. Like, a lot of people worry that if they share like a fleeting negative emotion that they had with you, that you will brand them forever. Like, oh, if I tell Kamala that I was annoyed at some decision she made because she rushed it, you know, like it was not well thought through, she'll always brand me as like the complainer. But if they can say, hey, yeah, actually I felt annoyed by this decision you made because it sort of rushed through some stuff that was happening on my team, and you could be like, oh wow, thanks for telling me, like, let me clarify, this is where it was coming from, or oh my gosh, I need to reverse that, or thank God you spoke up, right? Like, you make it okay for people to talk about that stuff. And you make it okay for them to bring that data to the table. So I would say one-on-one setting, just like pose it as like, emotions are data. Let's just practice sharing some of ours. It's going to feel uncomfortable, maybe for you and maybe for the other person, but if you just do it, you kind of build a habit. And it's that shortcut into a richer conversation, right? Because it's really scary and risky to tell your CEO, like, I felt annoyed by something you made, unless you kind of create that safety. So I'd say you start with the one-on-one, and then you can work it up to like a team setting. I had a client who would just do it as an opener, like once a month to their team meetings, just say like, hey, let's all go around and share a couple of like emotion data points we've had over the last few weeks of work. And you just sort of give people the practice in using emotional expression, and then have positive experiences for what happens afterwards.
Yeah. This is amazing, and I'm gonna try to avoid like going totally into my own story, but I want to say this was definitely two things that connect to my story. Is one of my big blind spots when I first started was I very much wanted to be like the calm and collected, you know, leader here, and I think then my pattern was sort of stuffing the negative emotion piece, and then people can see that, they can tell you're angry, but then you're not expressing it, and so there's like you know, incongruence there, right, in that. But then when I was working on this specifically, and actually using the feelings chart in my one-on-ones to try to fix this exact thing, I want to emphasize the point you made about the leader has to go first, right? Because then, you know, it's like for the employee, like, oh, well, Raymond went to some workshop, learned some new thing, and now he's going to make everybody do this other thing. And if they don't see me doing the work, right, or for those out there, if they don't see, the leaders doing the work first, then there's another like mismatch, like, oh, like we're sort of being asked to do this, but they're not leading by example. So anyways, I just wanted to add that. Okay, our last audience question, which is another anonymous one. Amazing, anonymous. How do I know if it's the right time to hire a coach?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I'm biased because, that was like the first thing I did when I launched my coaching business was I hired a coach. Like it was it continues to be my number one line item on my budget. Well, so one, I think there's different ways to do it. So if you're kind of in more of a bootstrapper mode and budget is an issue for you, I think you can get creative. Like there are group coaching options out there. You can do some of that self-coaching stuff that Ray and I were talking about earlier. And so you can put coaching into your life, even if you haven't quote unquote hired a coach yet. Sometimes I mentioned that there's like this explosion of startup coaching right now. So what's going on is a lot of people who are former startup operators are getting into coaching. They're not always trained in coaching, but like that's sort of their positioning. So what you can sometimes do is you can score a deal where there's somebody who former startup operator just hanging up their coaching shingle for the first time. Right now, they're just focused on getting clients. They might be a really great sort of budget person for you because they're talented, but they're not charging market yet. So seeing if you could network your way to someone like that. Attending like a T group weekend or something might be a lot for one weekend, but like doing some of those trainings and stuff like that, I think can be really helpful. And then if budget isn't an issue, but you're just sort of questioning like, oh, is now the right time? It really depends. I think you probably want to do some real thinking about what is it that you'd be hoping to get from working with a coach. And then from that shakes out who you're looking for. Like if it's really around mental health and emotional support, you want to focus with a coach in that direction, or maybe you want to work with a therapist. I don't know. If you're really looking for more like operational advice, like mentorship, maybe you want to follow more of that model of somebody who's been a CEO before and is now kind of mentoring, advising, coaching, but is going to take more of an advisor approach. For me, for example, like my positioning is that I help leaders feel better and lead better. So the feel better is sort of like feel more confident, feel less burned out, whatever it might be, and then lead better, clear expectations, stronger goals, get better performance from your team, become a better manager. So I would say like when you're looking for coaches, you want to see like what do they specialize in, and is that a fit for what I'm hoping to get from working with a coach? And then that's how you know it's the right time. I think a really common moment for me is when somebody has just closed a seed or just closed an A, and they're like, whoa, okay, like that problem was solved of the fundraising, but now I have like 40 million new problems. That's a really great moment. Because a coach should give you leverage. So if you're ever at a point when you're like, I need more leverage, whatever that point is, bootstrapper to growth stage, that's also just a really good sign that with the right coach, that could be a really it could change your trajectory by a couple of degrees, but 5 years out, you're in a wildly different place as a result.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Okay, I have a few questions for you before we wrap up.
Okay.
So you already answered straight up front the number one question of what does invention mean to you. So
I cheated. Sorry.
We got that one right off the bat. So related to that is who is your favorite inventor of all time?
Okay, so I thought about this for so long and I talked about it with my husband. And I finally confessed to him, I was like, I don't think it's one person. I think it's an archetype. And he's like, okay, well, maybe you could just answer that. So for me, it's not one person, but it's more of like a story. And it's this story of like, it's like a person, or maybe it's a team, and they develop this just really like ingenious, clever solution to something that's been really entrenched for a long time. And they just found it through like a new way of observing, or maybe they stumbled upon something. And these are people that would never describe themselves as inventors. So like a recent example is I was listening to NPR. Where was the headline? It was like something like researchers paint eyes on cow butts and then they don't die anymore. So it was like a conservation biologist in Botswana who realized that like lions wouldn't like attack the cattle
Wow.
if all they had to do was paint eyes on the butts of the cows. because then the lions would feel like they had been seen, something like that. So it's like, like these conservation biology programs were pouring in millions, like because there was so much tension between like the cattle herders who like needed the cattle to survive and then the people who wanted to preserve the lions. And it's like some dude went and painted an eye on a butt of a cow and like solved it all. And anytime I hear stories like that, I'm like, that is my favorite inventor of all time. So we
Okay.
can maybe put the link to the NPR
Yeah.
story in the show
Or
notes.
we have to look up the mystery inventor of the eyes on butts.
Yeah, it's just this conservation biologist who works in Botswana. Genius. So
That's awesome.
that's my archetype. Like that's the person of the moment, but next week it'll be somebody else I hear about.
Okay. Other than this conservation biologist, we have to research. Any other suggestions for folks doing awesome things that we should invite on the show?
Folks doing awesome things. Gosh, well, any of those folks I talked about earlier, but probably. So I have a major crush on the two founders of Dipsy. And I was debating whether they qualify as inventors or if they're more innovators. It's kind of borderline, but they're these two women that basically have created like new, like audible, like audiobook style erotica, and it's totally aimed at women. And I've been following them since the early days because a friend of mine was thinking about investing in them. So I followed them like from their like before they even had a mobile app. And I just think their product is incredible. And I think what they're doing in that space that has like never been aimed at women in like the history of mankind is really cool. And plus I just feel like they're probably learning a ton of stuff about like sound that might be really interesting, and I don't know, maybe it would be too X-rated for your audience, but if you could swing it, I have a major crush on these two women and I would probably tune in. So Gina and Sammy are their first names and they created Dipsy.
Okay. That's amazing. No, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, even though we had some Disney movie references in it, I don't think we need to keep Invent FM at G-rated for
Yeah.
it.
I'm sure they would find a way to do it tastefully.
There you go. Awesome. So Anamaria, thank you so much for your time today. I guess I just want to close with asking where can folks find you if they want to reach out and connect?
Yeah, sure. I can just screen share real quick, but it's basically my first name, Anamaria, one N, all one word. So that's my website, anamaria.coach, and you can follow me on Twitter at A&M Coach. I'm reinvigorating my Twitter after it's been dormant for many years. But yeah, my website has a ton of free content there. So, and if and when you want to work together in the future, or I also know a lot of coaches. So even if I'm not the right fit for you, I like to kind of refer people to folks. And my interest is always in helping people find the right coach for them, for what they're looking for their stage. So yeah, I would welcome anybody who wants to be in touch.
Awesome. Well, that's amazing. And we'll make sure to put links in the show notes and replay description. And don't forget the anamaria.coach/downloads for all the free stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks everybody who joined us live.
Yay. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.